Welcome to our weekly Zoom news conference. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. For the first time in a generation, the House of Representatives passed two historic bills on March 18th, H.R. 6 and H.R. 1603, that could lead to the legalization of millions of immigrants in the United States. While national media coverage focuses on the American Rescue Package and the infrastructure bill, the fate of these two bills will have a dramatic impact on the audiences ethnic media serve. To update us on the status of these bills, who they will impact, their chances of getting passed, we have assembled 6 speakers. Theresa Cardinal Brown at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington will give an overview. So Joseph Villela of the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, CHIRLA, will discuss DACA. Jose Munoz of United We Dream will share the perspective of a dreamer. Patrice Lawrence of Undocu-Black Network will discuss temporary protected status, or TPS. Brent Renison of the Global Immigration Council will discuss DACA, Deferred Action for Legal Childhood Arrivals. And Letty Rangel of the United Farm Workers Foundation will speak about HR 1063 and its meaning for farm workers. We're deeply grateful to each of these speakers for their time and expertise. Each will have 5 minutes to present, which seems terribly unfair to them, but the only way we could do justice to all the very important aspects of these two bills. Each will then be followed by 4 minutes of Q&A. Please enter your questions in the chat box. We'll try to keep to a very tight schedule, but we may run over an extra 5 to 7 minutes after the hour, and we hope all of you can stay. Next week, the briefing will feature Senator Alex Padilla, who spoke on our briefing when he was Attorney General of California, and now 3 months after his appointment to replace Kamala Harris, will share his thoughts from inside the Senate. Our thanks to our interpreters for providing simultaneous interpreting in Spanish and Korean, and to our conference coordinators for the wonderful work they do coordinating these conferences. I'm turning the conference over to today's moderator, Sunita Sarabji.
Morning, everyone. Let's just get right to it. We first welcome Theresa Cardinal Brown of the Bipartisan Policy Council. Theresa, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to do my best in the 5 minutes I have to provide an overview of the two bills and what's contained in them, and a little bit of context of what happens now that they have passed the House of Representatives. So the two bills we're talking about are H.R. 6, the Dream and Promise Act, and H.R. 1603, known as the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. Both of these bills were passed in the last Congress and were brought to the floor of this Congress under rules that allow essentially a shortcut for bills that have passed before. H.R. 6, the Dream and Promise Act, passed in a vote of 228 to 197 in the House this time, with 9 Republicans crossing the aisle to support and all Democrats voting yes. 5 Republicans did not vote. The bill would provide conditional permanent resident status for 10 years to Dreamers, deferred enforced departure holders, TPS status holders, and children of non-immigrant visa holders who may age out of status. They must be continuously physically present in the US since January 1st, 2021, pass a background check, and be enrolled in or complete an educational program to qualify. To adjust from this conditional status to a permanent green card, they must complete their educational programs or a term of military service or be employed. Those receiving a cancellation of removal under TPS or DED status would be eligible for permanent residence within 3 years of the date of enactment. And estimates by the Migration Policy Institute indicate that there may be as many or more than 3 million people who would be eligible under this bill who fall in one of those qualifying statuses. HR 1603, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, as I mentioned, was also passed in the last Congress and brought to the floor of this Congress. It passed the House by a vote of 247 to 174, with 30 Republicans supporting the bill and 1 Democrat who voted against it, and of course, all other Democrats supporting it. This bill would provide a pathway to a green card and the ability to apply for citizenship to farm workers who meet certain work requirements. It would reform and expand the H-2A temporary agricultural worker visa program as well. After the bill passed the House, Senators Michael Bennett, a Democrat from Utah, and Mike Crapo, a Republican from Idaho, have said they will introduce companion legislation in the Senate soon. The bill would provide a certified agricultural worker visa to undocumented people who have at least 1,035 hours of agricultural work during the 2 years before March 8th, 2021. The status would be valid for 5.5 years and can be extended. And they can apply while they have this status for green cards after they meet various requirements, including performing agricultural work for a number of years after getting the CAW status or the certified agricultural worker status. And again, there are estimates that there are more than 1 million undocumented farm workers who could become legal under this bill. As I mentioned, the bill also changes the H-2A temporary agricultural visa for future workers. It creates an electronic platform for filing and processing these cases, something that employers have asked for a long time. It modifies and adjusts the prevailing wage, the required wage that must be paid to H-2A workers. It changes and updates the domestic recruitment requirements to show that employers have tried to hire US workers for jobs in agriculture before offering it to foreign workers. It would guarantee the workers a minimum number of work hours, which indemnifies the workers should there be an issue with delays or inability for all the crops to come in due to weather or other extenuating circumstances. It also expands the visa to work that is agricultural, but is not temporary or seasonal. So some of these visas could go to year-round people, and it reserves a separate set of visas for just those in the dairy industry, which has been a big demand of dairy employers across the country. It does require mandatory use of the E-Verify program, which is an electronic system to verify employment eligibility for the agricultural industry to verify all future employment after these new visas are in place. And it permanently authorizes a housing program and provides financial assistance for rural rental housing and off-farm labor housing for agricultural workers. These were very big demands of many of the farm unions and advocates. The overview of the trajectory in the Senate is a little bit harder to see. For HR 6, there is no direct companion bill in the Senate. The closest is the DREAM Act, S-264, which was reintroduced in the Senate in February by Senator Dick Durbin, a Democrat of Illinois, and co-sponsored by Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican of South Carolina. That bill has some stricter requirements than HR 6 and doesn't address TPS or DED holders or the children of non-immigrants who could age out. Estimates are that that might cover about 2 million Dreamers. Senator Graham has said that he does not believe the bill can pass in its current form in the Senate and believes that the situation at the border with unaccompanied children might have to be addressed before it could move forward. Senator Durbin has been holding meetings with a bipartisan group of senators to try to determine what provisions others might want to see that could allow the bill to move forward. But as of now, there are no scheduled markups or hearings for the bill in the Senate. As mentioned above, there are a pair of senators looking to introduce a companion bill to the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, HR 1603, but it has not yet been introduced. Although the Farm Workforce Modernization Act was created as the result of detailed negotiations by farm grower groups and farm labor advocates, including farm worker unions, there are some who believe the bill will still require additional changes to pass in the Senate. Some grower groups are not happy with the changes to the H-2A program, which they say will increase their costs. Some smaller family farms that have relied on undocumented immigration in the past do not believe they would be able to work with the new H-2A visa rules. Some immigration advocates, on the other hand, would like to see H-2B visas be made fully portable. That is, the worker is allowed to move from job to job without requiring the employer to sponsor them. But because the bill addresses workforce issues that are endemic to agriculture, and because there are agricultural interests in many bipartisan states, I believe there is a higher baseline of bipartisanship for agricultural worker legislation. However, both of these bills must overcome the limitations of a 50-50 split in the Senate, with Democrats controlling by virtue of the tie-breaking vote that Vice President Kamala Harris holds. While there remains a legislative filibuster, that is a rule in the Senate that says that in order to proceed to a bill, 60 senators have to allow that to happen, and so any senator can hold that up. The bills will need to garner at least 10 Republican votes in the Senate to pass. Other options that are being considered is whether or not to move this bill or one of these bills as part of the larger COVID recovery packages that the President Biden is proposing, but no determination has been made on that yet. Obviously, any changes that are made to these bills in the Senate in order to gain the votes needed will need to be reconciled back in the House that has a Democratic majority. That makes this a very difficult proposition. However, there is a lot of momentum for these bills. The majorities of Democrats and Republicans in polls definitely support legalization for the Dreamers. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of bipartisan support for improving the conditions and the visas for farm workers in the United States and allowing them to legalize. The politics of the issue remain, though, challenging. Both parties rely on some form of stoking their bases when it comes to immigration, and that sometimes means it's difficult to find common ground in the middle. That having been said, as I mentioned, there is a lot of momentum for these bills, and I do believe that right now we are seeing the closest chance we've had in many years to some legislation going forward. And with that, I'll take questions.
Thank you, Theresa. Henrietta Burrows has a couple of really interesting questions. Henrietta?
Thanks, Anita. You seem to indicate that the prospect of these bills passing in the Senate is low, and they seem to truly represent immigration reform. So if they do not pass and no compromises can be made, can Biden then use executive action to make the changes that these bills represent?
President Biden could make some executive actions that might deal with some of the aspects of these bills, but not nearly to the breadth that legislation would do so. For example, he has already reinstated the DACA program to the way it was under President Obama, allowing new applicants to proceed. And he can do that by executive order, although there are court challenges right now to the president's ability to initiate that program. So should the courts rule that the program itself is unlawful, then the DACA program would disappear and only legislation could provide status to the Dreamers. The president could extend TPS status to those who are in danger of losing it. And that's one of the other groups that HR 6 is meant to address, as well as DED status. And he has done that for certain groups already. But the broader provisions that would provide permanent legal status and a pathway to citizenship would not be possible without legislation. On the farm workforce bill, he could make some of the changes to the H-2A program that were negotiated as part of the bill, things like the housing requirements or the prevailing wage by regulation. But the more substantive, again, legal status for the agricultural workers, probably that would be beyond executive action.
Thank you. Sunita, I just received a text message from Patrice that there's a conflict and we need to let Patrice speak next, if you don't mind, because otherwise—
That's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Patrice, welcome. Patrice Lawrence is from UndocuBlack. Patrice will talk about TPS. Patrice, welcome. And Theresa, thank you so much.
I have a problem. She hasn't joined. I have the text, but she hasn't joined. So I'm so sorry. We're trying to accommodate her, but why don't we go to Joseph Villela?
Okay, Joseph?
Hi, and good morning all. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Sunita, and others for putting this great panel together. Let me start by saying, who I am and the organization. My name is Joseph Villela, Director of Policy and Advocacy with chair by the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. We are a statewide membership organization with national impact. For decades, this country has been sending one word and one message to immigrants, and that's no. Even as we accept their labor, this nation has said no to our families. Even as we accept their entrepreneurship, we have said no to their dignity. Even if we accept their sacrifice, the government has continued to say no to their freedom. And so for those reasons, at the end of the last year, Cheryl launched a campaign known as Yes to Immigrants Forward. And essentially what we hope to get out of this national campaign is to make sure that we provide a permanent relief to all immigrants, regardless of their statuses, including those who are protected under DACA and TPS. I also want to highlight that I think the other two bills that we want to one other bill that are still pending on the House, and our hope is that they'll be considered for vote, is the U.S. Citizenship Act, which is essentially President Biden's blueprint that was introduced, and our hope that that will be voted on, as soon as possible. And also we have another bill that was introduced both on the Senate and the House, and that is the Citizenship for Essential Workers, who were introduced by Senator Padilla, but then also House Member Castro. At least for us, one of the things that we see about DACA and why it's so important that we speak about immigration in the broadest terms is that we see some of the challenges that we're facing right now due to our broken immigration system. And even though currently approximately 600,000 individuals are protected under DACA, these individuals, who the majority of them, 2/3 are 25 years or younger. The majority of them are women, about 53% of those, and this is based on the Pew research. We believe that even though they have a temporary protection, the fact that we had a president for 4 years that was undermining this program, and oftentimes we saw our own membership feeling a sense of loss, because they did not understand why we have a previous president that was attacking them every single day. But most importantly, their legal status and actions and living in lives will be threatened by just every change of an executive order. I think I also like to point out the benefits of DACA, understanding that it provided temporary relief to many young adults who many of them were professionals, others were just workers and trying to finish their education. The majority of them indicated, based on a survey, 70% indicated that they got their first job because of their change of status. Also, 45% reported that an increase of earnings. The other thing to highlight about the importance of change of status is that 50% of DACA beneficiaries who were surveyed also opened a bank, and 33% obtained their first credit card. So we see that changing an immigration status is not only beneficial for the individual, but then also beneficial to our economy, which also lays out this mandate for elected officials, especially understanding that our chair-like headquarters is in California, and the majority of individuals protected under DACA or TPS, as well as who are undocumented, are residents of the state of California. And so 80% of the voters in California support a pathway to citizenship for all immigrants, understanding that they contribute to the economy, understanding that, for instance, in California, more than 70% of those who are undocumented have resided in our state for at least 10 years. So the undocumented population in our state is well settled. They contribute to the economy, and it's time for Congress to actually provide a permanent relief for documented individuals, but then also those who are undocumented. I like to close a little bit about going over the story about how DACA came about. DACA came about because of the pressure that was put to the federal government as it relates to the failure of not passing a comprehensive immigration reform bill or passing the DREAM Act. Let us remember that in 2013, the Senate actually passed a bill Senate Bill 44, which provided a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million, in addition to other provisions that were not as perfect as we hope. And so this came out of that pressure that was put onto President Obama to create some relief in the absence of a comprehensive approach. Lastly, the DREAM Act, it's also good to point out that the DREAM Act has been introduced since 2001. And so I think this gives you an example of the paralysis of this Congress and the effect that it has on the communities, that it is time, at least 20 years since this bill was introduced and Congress has failed to actually pass that. It is important to know that, there has been different versions of the bill. Most of the versions have at least 48 co-sponsors on the Senate and 152 co-sponsors on the House. So this bill is popular, but then also the recent passage of HR 6 also had bipartisan support, which is also important to highlight. At the end of the day, DACA has been super beneficial to all immigrants who are young, but then also those who are not that young, but also have families now and are the breadwinners of those families. And so for us, as we expecting a major decision, as Theresa mentioned on DACA, it is if we have a negative decision saying that could potentially say that the program is unconstitutional, it will be on the hands of Congress to make sure that these individuals, more than 600,000 who have protection, do not have to go back to the shadows, understanding the consequences that it will have not only to their families, the individual, but to the economy. And for that, at least for us, we're looking at all the bills that Congress has introduced, and we believe that it's time to look at the broader perspective, understanding that the last time we addressed immigration in the broader sense was 35 years ago, in which indicates that our immigration system is broken, outdated, and is inhumane. And with that, I turn it back to Sandy.
So we have a question from Jorge Macias. Jorge, could you ask your question?
This question is, hi, good morning, everyone. This question is for Joseph Villela. Oh, Joseph, with 50-50 senators and senators, Republicans and Democrats, do you believe that all Democrats are in favor of these bills? And how hard it is going to convince the Republicans to support this bill? Because people cannot wait longer for a positive response from Congress and President of the United States.
Let me start by saying the following. The bills, the U.S. Citizenship Act was again introduced in February. There was a poll recently done by Fox, not the very liberal media outlet per se, that indicated that 60% of voters support a path to citizenship for immigrants. There has also been ongoing support for those immigrant youth who will be protected under DACA or a DREAM Act. And those and that support is both bipartisan. Democrats and Republicans and independent have supported that, and usually it's about 70% of voters who support a DREAM Act like a bill. If you're trying to measure different polls, and so for us, we understand the political dynamics on the Senate, but then also we understand that voters have consistently demanded an overhaul of our immigration system because they understand that it's not working for anyone. So as it relates to the politics, any elected official, especially the Republican Party, who want to potentially change their brand that they have under Trump, this is the opportunity for them to rechange that and actually by providing relief to immigrants and trying to get rid of that label that they have, which to some extent is well served, of being a party that caters towards white nationalist organizations as well as racist organizations. And so in our perception, we believe that if voters are on our side, it will not be easy. But that's why we're looking at potentially getting, figure out what's the best approach to get those 10 senators that we need on the Senate. But then also, quite frankly, also urge the Democratic majority to use all the tools that they have to potentially attach any immigration relief to an infrastructure bill or reform the filibuster. To some extent, there has been conversation to reform the filibuster to enact HR 1, the voting rights. And so it's our perception that this is also a critical issue that Democrats should consider either doing trade reconciliation, or if there's a filibuster reform, for this to also be part of that reform.
Thank you. Sunita, Patrice Lawrence has just joined us, so let's go to her with great thanks to both our first two speakers, and we hope to get back to you both with more questions. But I think Patrice only has about 4 minutes.
Got it. Okay. Welcome, Patrice.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you for having me. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Patrice Lawrence. I am the co-director of UndocuBlack Network. We're a network of Black and formerly and currently undocumented people all across the country. I'll be talking specifically about TPS, temporary protected status, and deferred and forced departure that is included in HR 6, the Dream and Promise Act, and why it matters, quite frankly, to Black people. Of the 13 countries that had TPS status when Donald Trump took power early in 2017, about 9 of them are Black majority countries. This includes countries in Africa, as well as countries in the Caribbean. And so it is really important that we do this if we are in any way, shape, or form saying that we believe in any form of racial justice. And the second thing is that Joe Biden was elected, as we know, and he has pointed out himself, largely because of the Black population. They have announced it several times that they are trying to advance racial equity. They're trying to do justice, economic justice, all these pieces. This is all for where TPS holders lie. I wanted to piggyback off what Joseph had said, which is to mention the fact that Democrats and Republicans can work together should they want to. It is a little known secret that in 2019, there was a legalization bill tucked away for Liberian DED holders, deferred and forced departure, as well as Liberian TPS holders in the 2019 NDAA, the Defense Authorization Act. It was tucked away to give citizenship for 10,000 Liberians, and Democrats and Republicans had to agree in order for that to happen. What we did see, however, was a hampering of the process. And so although 10,000 people are eligible, we know that only 2,600 people were able to apply, and less than 120 got their green cards as of last fall. As a result, HR 6 is really important for Liberian DED holders as well, because it gives more time. Time is important. I think now more than ever, we understand the value of time, being at home, having lost loved ones, and just understanding that it is not only citizens that have gone through this process of a pandemic and life in America during uncertain time. TPS holders and DED holders have as well. This bill gives time. It gives 3 years for them to be able to adjust their status, for them to get what it is that they need to be able to do that. It is a finite number of people based on the days that they've been in the country. So we are talking about the folks that lost their status or risked it during the Trump administration. And thirdly, we have seen that it has happened before. This is not impossible. It has absolutely happened before. And so we know that it can happen again should the politicians be willing to do so, and should we pressure them to do so and remind them why. I'll pause for questions with the 1 minute I have.
Thank you so much. That was a great overview. Very much appreciated. We move on next to Jose Munoz of United We Dream. Jose.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jose Munoz. I serve as the National Communications Manager of United We Dream. We are the nation's largest network of undocumented immigrant young people. I myself am also a queer DACA recipient. Thank you so much for the invitation to represent United We Dream, and so excited to be on this call with so many other wonderful folks in this fight with us. I'm excited to talk about the importance of moving legislation this year that provides a pathway to citizenship for millions of undocumented people. I myself know firsthand the importance of this fight, I came to the US when I was just a few months old and have been living with the uncertainty of being undocumented in the United States for 30 years. In 2013, I received DACA for the first time, which allowed me to obtain a work permit, get a driver's license, and finish college. It alleviated some of the fear of potentially being detained and deported. But unfortunately, we have seen over the past 4 years that DACA recipients like me have lived our lives court case to court case. Even after the Supreme Court thwarted the Trump administration's plans to end DACA in June and potentially deport hundreds of thousands of DACA recipients like me, to this day, DACA still remains at risk, with a court in Texas potentially ruling any day now on the legality of the program. And so for hundreds of thousands of DACA recipients, including the over 60,000 LGBTQ DACA recipients like me, a pathway to citizenship is an imperative. And that's not all. There are hundreds of thousands of 15 and 16-year-olds who have been waiting to apply for DACA since Trump tried to end it in 2017. They're hoping to apply for the first time to get some of the same protections that have been afforded to those of us that have been enrolled in the program for years. And while DACA has helped hundreds of thousands of young people like myself, DACA does not protect all undocumented people. There are millions of immigrants who have never qualified for DACA in the first place. And so the only way to truly provide protection for undocumented people is for Congress to pass a pathway to citizenship, and they must do so swiftly. Like has already been mentioned earlier on this call, last month, the House of Representatives passed 2 bills, the Dream and Promise Act and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which collectively would put over 5 million people on a pathway to citizenship, including immigrant young people with and without DACA. For us at United We Dream, we know that there is no time for excuses. Our communities need relief, and they need it now. Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House, and they must do everything in their power to deliver for our communities. Over the past few weeks, immigrant young people of United We Dream have taken action in Florida and in Texas to demand senators like Marco Rubio and John Cornyn support the swift passage of the DREAM, the Secure, and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act in the Senate. It is clear that they won't, and that in many cases, they're more interested in playing politics with our lives, holding legislation hostage to use immigrant young people as pawns in the upcoming elections. We will not let them use Republican obstructionism as an excuse. Democrats should not allow Republicans to obstruct this issue. It has been nearly 35 years since the last time legislation providing a pathway to citizenship for millions of people passed. Democrats must use every single tool at their disposal to ensure the passage of citizenship bills like the DREAM Act, like the Secure Act and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act in the Senate. And that includes using processes like the reconciliation process, because we know that citizenship is relief and we cannot keep excluding millions of people as our country moves towards recovery. Biden and Democrats need to go bold, and they need to do it now. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Absolutely. I'm going to start off with a question for both Jose and Joseph. During the Obama administration, there was an initiative known as DAPA, which unfortunately has gone by the wayside, Deferred Action for Parents of Childhood Arrivals. Do you think that that has any place in in HR 6? And should we expand the bill to include protection for parents of childhood arrivals?
I can go, and then I'll let my colleague Jose, relay his remarks. I think for us, we understand that we have the DHS Secretary Mayorkas, who may be, we be able to trying to figure out what can be possible, for him to do, understanding that the previous Secretary of Homeland Security issued that program, DAPA, which was never implemented because of a court decision. So our hope first is to make sure that Congress do the job, and that is to actually provide relief to the millions of folks who have been in the shadows for so many years. It is their job to deal with big issues, and this is one of the big issues that they must deal this year. In the absence of that, we also it doesn't mean that we're trying to pressure the administration to, one, roll back all the draconian rules and regulations that President Trump issued during the last 4 years, but then also expand on protections. I'm going to give you an example, for instance. And on day one, President Biden issued an executive order to also stop the deportation, a moratorium on deportation for 100 days. Our hope is that moratorium will go beyond that and also protect individuals not only from deportation, but seek to provide some sort of relief. There are different tools that the administration can do to provide relief, not only to those who are protected on the TPS or DACA, but then also the parents. So our hope is that that will be in the toolbox that Democrats will have in the absence of a vote that provides a permanent relief for the 11 million.
Jaya Padmanabhan has an interesting question. She asks, if the DREAM and Promise Act did pass in the Senate, what do you think might prevent the undocumented population from taking advantage of it? Jose, could I throw that question to you?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that question. Again, Jose Munoz from United We Dream. So one of the things that we've seen as we have policies like DACA, for example, is that our community needs a lot of support to make sure that they're getting the right information. For example, earlier this year, at the end of last year, actually, when a court in New York ruled against the Trump administration and forced USCIS to start reaccepting DACA applications, essentially putting the DACA memo to where it was in 2012, we launched into a very extensive campaign to make sure that as many people as possible understood what it was that they needed to apply for DACA for the first time. There are a lot of questions that are out there, and unfortunately, there's a lot of potential misinformation. And so it's really important for community organizations, for people on the ground, to work with lawyers and advocates to provide the most accurate information to communities to ensure that folks who benefit from these types of legislation aren't taken advantage of, to ensure that they have the right information. And so I share that sort of as an example of some of the work that, us at United We Dream, and I know that Sheila's on as well, and that they have also done with us. And so it's important to make sure that folks have the right info.
Absolutely. And Henrietta Burrows has the last question. Henrietta. Henrietta asks, what effect do you think any passage of these bills will have on the border issues that this country is currently seeing? Jose or Joseph?
I think for us, we have to detach this notion that any legislation that is being proposed is actually attracting, migration from other countries. We first have to realize the root causes of migration and why folks are fleeing those countries. It's not a coincidence that folks are fleeing Honduras because they have issues with their government, but they're having impacted by several natural disasters. And so for us, the notion that we might be discussing potential relief for the 11 million is not an attraction for folks, but rather the conditions in their country. And for us, that's why the U.S. Citizenship Act has to be on the table, because it deals somehow with the root causes of migration and provides legal protections and legal ways for individuals to migrate. At this point, there is no legal channels for immigrants to seek asylum or refugee from Honduras because of a broken immigration system.
Theresa, could I ask you to weigh in on this question as well?
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt Jose. I just wanted to point out that the Farm Worker Modernization Act, by changing the terms of the H-2A visa, could be a vehicle for some of the migrants to get legal visas to come work in the United States. And we don't know how much of the current migration flow might be able to take advantage of that. The other thing is that as individuals who are already here legalize their status, they may have relatives that would be part of this undocumented migration that they could sponsor. So it could have an impact in the future, but Joseph is right. None of these bills would allow anybody who's coming now to benefit from those bills, because they all have dates that you had to have arrived before the date of introduction. So anybody arriving now would not be able to take advantage of these bills should they pass now.
Thank you to all three of you. We next bring on Lady Rangel. She's from the United Workers Foundation, Farm Workers Foundation, excuse me. Reporters, please note that this is a different organization than the United Farm Workers. Lady, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Sunita, and thanks everyone for inviting me and for being here today to talk about this very important topic that we're discussing here. My name is Lady Rangel. I am the UFW Foundation's National Communications Manager. The UFW Foundation is a nonprofit organization, and for more than 15 years, the UFW Foundation has mobilized farm workers across the country to advocate for more equitable policies, such as immigration reform, pesticide protections, heat standards, hazard pay, and other worker protections. We engage our constituents in systemic change to break the cycle of poverty while also providing critical services. In fact, the UFW Foundation is the largest federally accredited immigration legal service provider in California. The UFW Foundation, as we just heard, also is a sister organization but separate organization to the United Farm Workers. And for me, the plight of farm workers is not academic, because I am one of them. I am a farm worker. My parents are farm workers, and my family is also one of those undocumented farm worker families that would benefit from the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. My parents, siblings, uncles, and cousins all work in agriculture, doing the difficult yet skilled labor necessary to keep America fed. I also have worked in agriculture for many years to pay my way through college. The COVID-19 pandemic, as we know it, has really solidified for all of us in the American public what we have always known, and that's that farm workers have always been essential and are crucial to America's communities, economy, and food supply. The reality of farm workers stands in sharp contrast to their designation by the federal government as essential critical infrastructure, as essential workers. Out of the nation's 2.4 million farm workers, roughly half are undocumented. So we're talking about more than 1 million of them who are here without legal status. A path to immigration for undocumented farm workers is critically important to our nation's food supply and agriculture system, and a more stable farm workforce means greater food safety and security to the benefit of all Americans. And that's why today I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about our agricultural immigration bill, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. You know, growers say they need a stable workforce, and undocumented farm workers need legal status. That's why in 2019, after very long months of complex but thoughtful negotiations between lawmakers from both parties, the UFW Foundation, the United Farm Workers, and most of the nation's grower associations, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act was created. And this bill would let undocumented farm worker families like mine in this country, who are in this country now, and I think that that's a good point to emphasize on, is that we're talking about immigrants who are already in the United States, right? And it does not have anything to do with what's happening in our southern border. And the Farm Workforce Modernization Act would allow undocumented farm workers in the country now earn the legal right to permanently stay by continuing to work in agriculture. Workers first would have to pass a criminal background check. They would also, once they go through that, they would have to apply to get that temporary legal status or that work permit, as long as they've worked 180 days in agriculture in the last 2 years prior to the bill being introduced in the House. So just this March in 2021, their immediate family members in the country would also be able to apply to get that work permit and would also be protected from deportation. And then depending on the worker's experience, they would have to continue working in agriculture for either 4 or 8 years to then be able to become permanent legal residents. Farm workers would then, after that, be able to apply for citizenship under our current immigration laws. The Farm Workforce Modernization Act became the first agricultural immigration bill approved by the House in more than 30 years in 2019 when it first passed the House. And then now the House passed the Farm Workforce Modernization Act for a second time just this last March, on March 18th, 2021, on a 247 to 174 vote, including the support of 30 Republicans. During the pandemic, farm workers have been more vulnerable than ever, and they're more vulnerable than many other populations to contracting COVID-19 due to the reality of their transportation, living and working conditions, such as their crowded housing, their need for carpooling and other crew leader bus transportation to agricultural establishments. With legal status and a path to citizenship, farm workers would be able to improve their wages and working conditions and stand against serious labor issues and abuses. We are closer than ever to winning legalization for millions of immigrants. The House passage of both the Farm Workforce Modernization Act and the Dream and Promise Act in the first weeks of the 117th Congress really demonstrates the commitment to support Dreamers, TPS recipients, and farm workers. And we're really close than ever again to winning that legalization for millions. Thanks, and now I'm happy to take your questions. I think you're on mute.
We have a very interesting question. Would undocumented people ever get to qualify, undocumented farmers ever get to qualify for Social Security? Would a path to citizenship provide retroactive recognition of the amount of hours that they've worked to qualify them for Social Security?
So as soon as they are able to apply for that work permit, right, which the eligibility requirements are 180 days in the last 2 years, they would be able to get that Social Security so that they could work legally in agriculture. They would have to continue working in agriculture. And I think I need for you all to clarify a little bit more what you mean by retroactively.
So say a farm worker has worked here for 20 years, right? But they're going to start their path to legalization now. Would in order to qualify for Social Security, you need a certain number of hours. Would it go back to recognize those hours that a person has worked while he was undocumented, he or she?
Yeah, so all of the, we know that farm workers have been here for many of them for many decades and have been working and have 20, 30 years of experience working in agriculture. Those are all hours that they would be able to use for applying for legal citizenship. And it's something that, will not be erased once this bill gets passed or becomes law. It's something that they will always have. In fact, in order for them to move on to the next step, which would be legal permanent residency or a green card, they would have to either have more than between 4 or 8 years of experience working in agriculture. So all of the years that they have in experience is something that they will be able to use.
Henrietta Barrows asks, what is the current status of your family in this country now, and what is your immigration status? And you can choose to answer that or not.
Yeah, no, I'm very open with my story, right? And I am protected under DACA currently, and that's something that I'm very thankful for. But we need permanent protection because I do live on a 2-year basis, and that's really prohibiting me from establishing a home here permanently. My parents are undocumented farm workers. We've been undocumented for many years, almost 20 years here in the United States now. It's something that the Farm Workforce Modernization Act would provide for us, legal status. My parents, who have more than 20 years working in the fields and have that experience, would finally be able to go back to their home countries to see their brothers and sisters who they haven't seen since they migrated here. And it's something that they have more than earned.
Lady, thank you so much for your comments. Very much appreciated. We move on next to Brent Renison. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name, Brent Renison. Brent is going to talk about an interesting issue which hardly ever comes up in the conversation around immigration, and that is deferred action for legal childhood arrivals. These are kids who are aging out of their dependent immigration status once they turn 18. Brent, welcome.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I've been an immigration lawyer for 24 years, and I have clients who I've been working with for almost that length of time, who are going through the legal immigration system, being sponsored by their employer. And because of the per country limitations, we have limits on the number of people in each category who can immigrate from any given country, and it's based on country of birth. This has affected, in the family category, people born in Mexico or the Philippines, where we have many long-standing ties with those countries. And it's affected in the employment categories, mostly people born in India or China. And over the last more than a decade, the priority dates, the people's place in line has moved so slowly that now families who brought their children here when they were, before elementary school, they're now finding that their children are turning 21 years old. They are not eligible for a dependent H4 status or L2 status or E status anymore. And some of them are transitioning over to student visas. Some of them cannot do that because they're disabled. They're being forced in a very difficult situation, being really in the same situation as anyone who is a beneficiary of DACA, who is a dreamer. And so there's a group of these young people who are now advocating to try to be part of the DREAM Act. One of them is Deep Patel with ImproveTheDream.org, who is trying to advocate for inclusion of basically what Theresa mentioned in the beginning is one of the additions to this HR 6 was adding in people who are the children of H-1B or L-1 or E immigrant or non-immigrants who are in the process of immigrating, but it's taking so long that they age out. Now, there was some legal arguments that were working for a while, which would allow the parents, once they became a permanent resident, to then in turn file for their children and get the original priority date. But those cases were struck down by the US Supreme Court. And unfortunately now what happens is, let's say a kid comes in when they're 5 years old, and now they're 21 and their parent gets the permanent resident status finally after all those years of waiting, but they don't. Their parent turns around and files a petition for them, and they have to wait another 8, 9, 10 more years because they lose their priority date. And not only that, is another anomaly is some people are actually, with the recent forward movement of priority dates that happened this last October in the employment categories, there were a lot of people who finally were able to file their adjustment of status applications, and some of them with their under 21 kids who are like 18, 19, 20, but what happened is because of a very rigid interpretation of the law, some of these people are now going to be denied because they're aging out. So as a result of this national origin discrimination that we see both in the family category and in the employment category, we are seeing kids age out and needing to be protected. And so HR 6 will help if the provision appears in the Senate version, and if we actually get something out of all this effort. But I also want to mention a few things. One is the administration right now can fix a lot of this by changing the interpretation. The US Supreme Court said that the agency, it was within its power to either have a broad reading and let people keep their priority dates, or a narrow reading and not. And this affects a lot of family immigrants too. A lot of people don't realize that DACA recipients, dreamers of all types, whether they came here legally or as undocumented, there are a lot of blended families with lots of people who have US citizen permanent resident relatives, and they have been waiting for years and years to legalize, and in the meantime they have to stay with their families, and so that forces any undocumented immigration. The per country limits and the artificially low quotas are really at the root cause of all of this problem. And on the issue of is this really going to become a reality? Are we really going to have legislation? I will tell you my personal opinion, having worked on legislation and got legislation passed. Most of it has to be very small and put on a defense appropriation bill or something. If you want to pass this kind of legislation, you cannot rely on the Republicans. The filibuster must be reformed, and it has to be a Democrat-only effort. Because if you rely on trying to get 10 Republicans, the bill will be so different from what it is now, it will be unacceptable to the other side. It is not possible, in my view, to have a bipartisan bill passed, period. That's my personal opinion. It has to be filibuster reform and passage by mere majority, with Kamala Harris casting the deciding vote. And that's what will happen. That's my opinion. Also, another thing, I have a class action lawsuit that is trying to help H4 kids, mostly born in India, who are aging out. And so our theory is that the agency is committing national origin discrimination in making their age frozen only based on the India national origin chart versus everyone else. And so that can be found on our website, entrylaw.com, under the backlog Child Status Protection Act lawsuit. It's currently pending in federal court, and it might take years to resolve, but I'm hopeful that some of these things that Biden can do will be able to convince him to have a more liberal interpretation of the law, change that Supreme Court decision, essentially allowing people to keep their original priority date from the earliest petition if they are a child who aged out and their parents want to petition for them. I'm hopeful that we can get this new administration with part of our litigation to settle, to actually bring about some change without the legislation being necessary. But it requires USCIS to have somebody appointed, and we're still very early in the administration, and people are very anxious, but we have to give the administration some time to get up to speed and start making these decisions.
Brent, I wanted to ask you a question before we turn it over to Sandy to ask a question of all speakers. There is also a bill right now in Congress to eliminate the per country caps, which would, how do you see that playing into these huge backlogs that people are facing, which puts their dependents in this very precarious situation?
Well, the per country caps are discriminatory. They have no place in our American system, period. What we need to do is also recognize that due to inefficiencies, the agency itself has failed to issue over 400,000 visas over the years. They've lost them due to inefficiency. We need to recapture those numbers and use them to clear the backlog. We need to increase immigration levels. People don't understand that since the immigration quotas were set back in 1990, right? When the Berlin Wall, after the Berlin Wall fell, these were the limits set back then. And in fact, the number of preference immigrants based on a work or family other than spouses of US citizens has actually declined since 1990 because they subtract the number of spouses of US citizens from the number. And so the actual number of immigrants has declined in the employment and family preference category since 1990. We are a different country than we were in 1990. We have ceased to become a nation of immigrants. It is ridiculous. The Republicans are calling for less immigration. We don't need less, we need more.
Sandy, you have a question for all speakers.
I
Could I turn
do.
it over to you?
Thank you. And this has just been very enlightening from all of the speakers. I guess I have a final question to ask all of you. Public opinion supports immigration reform. I mean, this has been a shift, and maybe the pandemic helped by underscoring the importance of essential workers. Maybe the remarkable effectiveness of the Dreamers is spilling over into all immigration. I'm not sure, but we do seem to have public support. If there are delays in getting these two bills through, are we in danger of losing that support? And as people in ethnic media, how do we sustain the public support? And to what extent does public support provide a lever, or is this all sort of in the hands of power brokers in Washington? What should we be focusing on to sustain that support? Should it all go to changing the filibuster? These are kind of questions we ask as editorial writers and as media that really provide a voice for our communities, many of whom will really have their futures determined by these two bills. So maybe we could start with Ms. Brown very quickly and go through our speakers. What is the role of public opinion at this point? How useful is it, and could we lose it over time?
I think public opinion is very important because there is no member of Congress that doesn't look at polling. They all look at polling, but they do look especially at polling in their district, in their state. Nationwide polls are of less influence on most members of Congress. So I think where public opinion is most effective is by constituents of the members within their district. They react very strongly to what they are hearing when they are in their town hall meetings, when they get their constituent calls in their offices, what the local papers are saying, what they see and hear when they go home. And so I think that it's important for folks who are looking to support these bills to broaden their advocacy, frankly, to every state and every location they can. We have, and we've seen this in election after election, majorities of the populace don't actually live in the majority of the geography of the country, right? They tend to be heavily concentrated. And it's those places where, the constituencies are not calling for this. in general, Republicans, even if they're supportive of some of these changes, it's not a very high priority for them. It's not going to be the thing. Voting for this kind of bill is not going to get them reelected, but it might get them challenged in a primary. And that's the political calculus they have to play. And so what has to change at the end of the day is that political calculus. I think it is changing slowly, but it has to change.
Thank you. That's very insightful. Jose Munoz has to leave, so let's go to Jose for your thoughts on this, and then we'll go back to the order.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Jose from United We Dream. I think I'll share two thoughts on the question. The first, I will say, when we consider the reality, which is, yes, it's extraordinarily popular across the board, whether it's a pathway to citizenship or broad legalization, depending on how folks are polled, it gains broad support. And so there needs to be movement on this year. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, these are people's lives. It has been over 30 years since the last time broad legalization has passed, 1986. Like I mentioned in my remarks, I have been living in the US since I was 3 months old, and I have been undocumented the entirety of that time, going on 30 years. And so when we're thinking also about the second part of your question, which is what can you all do as ethnic media, or what can we be doing in this vein, it's recognizing the political games that are being played, the false equivalence of what's happening at the border. People will always come to seek asylum. It does not matter who the president is. We as a nation can do both, and we should do both. We can treat people at the border with dignity and respect and the humanity that they deserve when they come to seek asylum. And we can address a decades-long problem that has millions of people living without support because of COVID-19, living without healthcare, not having the wages or having the workers' rights that they deserve simply because of their immigration status. And so when talking and writing about this issue, it's so important as members of the media to ensure that we are focusing on the realities of people's lives and focusing on the humanity that we each deserve, regardless of our immigration status.
Thank you, Mr. Munoz. And now let's go to Joseph Villela at Shirla.
Thank you. So I think just piggyback on what Hussein mentioned. So I think telling the stories of individuals affected are critical. In addition to that, also telling the voices of voters who are related to those undocumented, those who are in the shadows, they are critical to the elections, and many of them are actually voting for immigrant justice every cycle. So also think about those voters who are connected to families who are in the shadows. I think that the other aspect is, as it relates to our values as a country, what type of country do we want to be, especially coming out after 4 years of draconian policies? This is the opportunity for the country to actually do a 180 by enacting immigration reform for all. The last thing that I will say, I think this call meant, all the speakers went over different challenges of our current immigration system, of the family visas, the caps, etc. And so this tells you that we really need to overhaul the whole system overall. Otherwise, at times we might have a band-aid, but it will not solve the problem. If we were to enact HR 6 or other bills, for instance, many of those immigrant youth who will benefit and will get citizenship may not be able to sponsor their families because of the 3-10-year bar. What are those? Those are bars that are currently affecting individuals who could legally get their visas, but because of the 3-10-year bar, they cannot. And most of them are Mexican nationals. So at the end of the day, what is important for for all of you is to report on the human stories, report that voters want a solution, and report the current realities, as mentioned, that immigrants are facing, but then also their contributions to their communities. Many of them, as I mentioned, in California have been well settled. 70% of them have been living in our state for at least 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Very eloquently stated. Ms. Rangel.
Yeah, I think I really want to emphasize on what Joseph and Jose really touched on, which is, those stories and humanizing those stories. I think, when it comes to farm workers and when we're approached by the media, they tend to come at us with interest in stories that are talking about like low-skilled workers, or just really dehumanizing stories, which are totally not even the case. I mean, farm workers are highly skilled professionals who, yes, are low paid, but have incredible skills. And I mean, I know that the reason why I was not able to continue working in the fields was because it was so difficult. I had to do something else, and for me the easiest way was going through education. So just really talking to our communities and hearing from them is so incredible, and knowing that and paying attention to our communities is so incredibly important. So just, you know, as a little recap, just humanizing those stories is so valuable. I also think that, you know, when it comes to other issues like what we're seeing at the southern border, it's really about humanizing those stories, right? It really, you know, sometimes there's, you know, we have to pay attention to that human aspect. So it all goes back to me to that same point, which is just humanizing those stories and really telling the stories the way that they should be told, which is through that lens.
Thank you. That's an important call to action for us. And lastly, Mr. Renison, do you think there's any, you seem to have given up on trying to persuade Republicans, but even polls show significant support among Republican voters for immigration reform.
Yes. I live in Oregon, which is a blue state, but I live in a part of the state that is very red. And I can tell you that I try at every opportunity to explain. And when I can do that, people come around to understand the reality is that we are a nation of immigrants and that the immigration policies are unfair. But the fact of the matter is, with the filibuster rule, that there is not a really easy way to get things through the Senate. And also you have to recognize that even though there is, you know, some support among Republicans for some of these ideas, and they may say them in public or in private meetings and things, and they may hold those values within their own mind, but the fact is they have to realize that they will face a primary challenge if they vote for these things. We have to allow them to vote no. If we are having the filibuster rule, we have to somehow force 10 over. It's impossible. I can tell you right now, I can see no path to getting these bills passed. They're too big. If you talk about a small Liberian DED or, you know, program, sure. I took 6 years of advocacy to try to change 5 words in a statute to allow for widows of US citizens who are being deported because they weren't married for 2 years. It took 6 years of advocacy to get it on a appropriations bill. Sure, you can do that, but you cannot pass HR 6 or any of these other things on a bipartisan basis. I hope you prove me wrong, but I think I'll be right. You have to do away with, you have to make the filibuster a real filibuster again.
So
get it passed.
So maybe in the very near future, we need to do a briefing on what is this filibuster and how do we take it on. I just want to thank all of you, and Sunita, thank you so much for assembling this great panel. This is something it's almost like the air we breathe as ethnic media. Immigration, it's not even the newsfeed, it's day-to-day life. So having you spend your time and share your expertise today on these 2 bills to help us better understand what's at stake, what the status is and what the chances are of passage, we're truly grateful. Thank you very, very much.